Welcome to BK Academy of Chess. The Najdorf variation of the Sicilian Defense is characterized by the moves e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. The idea is to deny white the b5 square to his knights and light squared bishop while maintaining flexibility and development. If after knight c3, black immediately plays e5, then after bishop b5, if knight bd7, then 7 knight f5, or if bishop d7, then bishop takes d7, knight b takes d7, knight f5, and the knight on f5 is difficult to dislodge without concessions. After knight c3, a6, black's plan is usually to start a minority attack on the queen side and exert pressure on white's c4 pawn, which is often carried out by means of b5, bishop b7, and placing a knight on c5 or on c4, via b6. After knight c3, a6, the main line is bishop g5, knight bd7, the Verbit-List. This was the usual reply until the mid-1960s, when bishop c4 put the move out of business. Recently, however, ideas have been found by some Dutch players who call this variation the Verbit-List, the improved stratagem. The idea for black is to postpone e6 in order to retain more dynamic options, for example, to play e7 to e5 in one move. The idea was tested by Petrosian, Belov, and others, but received popular attention and developed rapidly after use by Dutch player Lady Kuling in 2007. The most important developments include e4, queen c7, queen f3, h6, bishop h4, e5. A setup discovered by Lady Kuling. The idea is to gain time over e6 by playing e7 to e5 in one move. Later on it turned out that g5 is even better. e4, queen c7, queen f3, b5 is the Verbit-List. It includes fianchetting the bishop to g7, bishop g5, knight bd7, bishop c4, queen b6. This is a move introduced by Leonardo Dominguez. The idea is to win a tempo by attacking b2, after which black can finish his development beginning with e6. The classical main line, knight c3, a6, bishop g5. The main move is e6. In the early days of the Najdorf, queen f3 was popular, but the reply, h6, did not allow white to create a dangerous attack. Nowadays white players almost universally respond with e4. White threatens e5, winning a piece, but black has several options. Bishop e7, queen f3, and now, queen c7, castle queenside, knight bd7. This is called the old main line. At this point white usually responds with g4, or bishop d3. After each of these moves there is a huge body of opening theory. After bishop e7, queen f3, h6, bishop h4, g5. This is known as the Argentine/Göteborg variation. It was first played in round 14 of 1955 by Argentine players Pano, Pilnik and Najdorf, who were facing the Soviet grandmasters Geller, Spassky, and Kurz. The games in question proceeded as follows: if takes g5, knight fd7, black aims to route a knight to e5, and then back it up by a knight at d7, or knight takes e6, Efim Geller's discovery. If takes e6, queen h5, king f8, bishop b5. Here Pano de Najdorf played knight e5, while Pilnik chose king g7. However, all three Argentine players lost in very short order and the line was, for a while, considered refuted. It was only in 1958 that Bobby Fischer introduced the defensive resource to equalize with rook h7, after e6, e4, queen b6, one of the most popular choices at master level. Queen d2. The extremely complicated poisoned pawn variation, queen takes b2, knight b3, is playable, but the preferred move is rook b1, queen a3. And here white has played both f5 and e5. Both led to extremely sharp play where slightest inaccuracy is fatal for either side. Since 2006, when it was played in several high-level games, e5 has become very popular. From the standpoint of the theory, it is regarded as white's only attempt to play for a win against the poisoned pawn variation, since all other variations, including f5, have been analyzed to a draw with best play. An example is the game Voley-Opans Kasparov, Moscow 2004, which was called a model modern grandmaster draw by Kasparov himself and Revolution in the 70s. Queen b6, knight b3. White opts for a quiet game, but black has nothing to worry about. Bishop e7, queen f3, knight bd7, castle queenside, queen c7, a setup very similar to the old main line. However, without the d4 knight, white will find it very hard to organize an attack. e6, e4, b5, the ultra-sharp Polugevsky variation. Black ignores white's threat and expands in queenside. e5, d takes e5, if takes e5, queen c7. Here white either plays e takes f6, queen e5, bishop e2, queen takes g5, or if takes e5, queen c7, queen e2, knight fd7, castle queenside, bishop b7, e6, e4, queen c7, championed by Garry Kasparov before he switched to playing queen b6, e6, e4, knight bd7, popularized by Boris Gelfand. e6, e4, knight c6, is risky and of a dubious theoretical reputation due to the response, e5, e6, e4, h6, the poisoned pawn deferred. This variation is very popular at the moment. Knight c3, a6, the modern main line. Since the early 1990s, the English attack, bishop e3, in some order, followed by f3, g4, queen d2, and castle queenside, has become extremely popular and has been intensively analyzed. Black has three main options. Bishop e3, the classical, e5, after knight b3. Black usually continues, bishop e6, trying to control the d5 square. The most common move is then, f3, allowing white to play queen d2. If white had tried to play knight b3, bishop e6, queen d2, then black could respond with knight g4, after a6, trying to transpose to the evening, and by playing bishop e3, e6, white can either opt for the even sharper Hungarian attack, also known as Perini attack, by playing g4, for the standard English attack by playing f3, a6, bishop e3, the knight move, knight g4, white continues with bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, bishop g7, but the nature of this position is quite different. The Verbit-List approach, bishop e3, knight bd7. The idea of this move is to get into the English attack while avoiding the Perini attack, as g4 is less dangerous now because black is more flexible, as the bishop on c8 can attack g4. Now in the knight on d7 can jump to interesting squares. Knight c3, a6. Introduced by Viniam and Susan in the 1930s, this received little attention until Fischer regularly adopted it, and it was a frequent guest at the top level through the 1970s. White plays bishop c4, with the idea of playing against f7, so black counters with e6, bishop b3, b5. The Susan has become less popular because of bishop c4, e6, bishop b3, knight bd7, where black intends to follow up later with knight c5. After bishop c4, it is possible to avoid the knight bd7 option after e6 with castle, but this cuts the aggressive possibility to castle long. With knight c3, because of the success of various players with these variations, white often plays a6, bishop e2, and goes for a quieter, more positional game, whereupon black has the option of transposing into a Scheveningen variation by playing e6, or keeping the game in Najdorf lines by playing e5. Another option is to play knight bd7, in the spirit of the Verbit-List. It is for this reason that this variation is called the Verbit-List Unlimited. After knight c3, white has other options. Though less common, they are also respected responses to the Najdorf, such as a6, e4, g3, and h3. Rarely played but sometimes used as a surprise weapon are rook g1, queen f3, queen e2, a4, and bishop d3. And there you have it, the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian Defense. Thanks for tuning into BK Academy of Chess, where together we build, and over the board we even the score.